If you were alive during the late 1990s and also happened upon an arcade during that time, there is little doubt that at one point or another you played a game based off of Sega's Model 2 hardware. For most people, this is going to be games like Daytona USA, Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, or House of the Dead, but there were literally dozens of other excellent arcade games released on this magical arcade platform. One of those games is a game that very, very few of you likely ever played or hell even knew existed. The game I'm referring to is Zero Gunner. I'm also one of those people that was completely oblivious to the existence of this game throughout the 90s and well into the new millennium. In fact, it wasn't until I learned of the game's sequel, Zero Gunner 2, that I was even tipped off to the first Zero Gunner's existence. At this point, it was the early 2010s and there were very few arcades in my area, and they sure as hell didn't have Zero Gunner arcade cabinets. Unfortunately, also at this time, Sega Model 2 emulation wasn't the greatest yet, so Zero Gunner 2 sadly slipped out of mine until very recently, when I decided to make a little video on the top 5 arcade exclusive shmups, which if you haven't watched already, you should go check it out. It's pretty rad, if I say so myself. But anyhow, I finally was able to play the original Zero Gunner while making that list, and while it just barely missed the cut, it still left an impression on me. So much so, I found myself playing it again and again after that video was finished and posted. So, I did what any self-respecting shmup fan with a video platform would do, make a review of course, and here it is. As if it weren't completely obvious already, Zero Gunner is a shmup, or in layman's terms a shoot-'em-up, developed and released by Saikyo back in 1997. This game has you selecting one of 3 helicopters that differ from one another in terms of color, agility, and power. The green one is the slowest, but most powerful, while the tan one is the fastest, but also the weakest. And then finally you have the trusty blue Choppa, which is the balanced one in the middle. Outside agility and attack power, each ship also has a different standard attack, which looks different depending on which helicopter you choose. This standard shot is powered up by collecting power-ups dropped by the red enemy craft after you've destroyed them. Serves them right for being the only red enemies in the game, idiots. However, one thing that is sadly the same across all 3 selectable aircraft is the bomb attack. Bombs are strategically used both for getting out of tight near-death situations or unleashing a devastating attack on the surrounding enemies and bosses. In the words of Captain Planet, the power is yours on how you choose to use them. After you've selected your helicopter Goldilocks in the 3 Bears style, you must then select one of 4 courses, which include Asia, North America, Europe, and Expert. I don't really remember learning about the Expert continent in geography, but maybe we learned about that when I was drawing Pokemon and handguns inside my textbook. God, they would have locked me up and thrown away the key if I was a kid today. But anyhow, with the exception of Expert, each course has you blasting through 5 stages, each in the form of large famous cities on those continents. As for the Expert route, it has you playing through 10 random cities from the 3 selectable continents, albeit with more bullets flying at you since this is Expert mode, bitch. Also, Expert is the only mode where you can accumulate a score while playing, so if you're one of those hardcore score chasers, this is the mode you'll want to play. Regardless of what route you play through, Zero Gunner is a hard-ass game, and you will die many, many times in true shmup fashion. There are plenty of projectiles flying at you in most areas throughout the game that you'll have fun dodging while also blasting the shit out of this game's many enemy ships and bosses. Zero Gunner uses a lock-on system to decide what your helicopter starts shooting. While this mechanic allows you to do some cool 360-degree assaults on some of the enemies in the game, mostly bosses, I found the lock-on system mechanic to be more of a hindrance than a cool, useful feature. Crowd control is a very important aspect of any shooter, and Zero Gunner is no exception. Except in Zero Gunner, whatever enemy happens to be closest to your ship's line of sight is the one you'll automatically lock onto. As soon as that ship is destroyed, your ship will lock onto the next target that is closest to your line of sight, assuming one is nearby. While this might not sound problematic, what will often happen is you'll quickly destroy one ship, but then your helicopter will lock onto another ship that you didn't want to lock onto, or it just won't lock onto anything at all. Because of this, you are greatly handicapped in your ability to take care of all the ships around you, especially in some of the more crowded sections of the game, where around 10 or more enemies will be attacking you at once. This obviously results in more bullets, which also results in more deaths, so yeah, that kinda sucks. Another odd part about the lock-on system is that it runs off a gauge that only allows you to lock onto an enemy for a few seconds before the lock is broken. Luckily, it resets whenever you lock onto a new enemy, which means that with the exception of some of the bosses, you never even come close to running out of lock-on gauge. This kinda makes me wonder why the hell Saikyo even bothered including it in the game in the first place, since it seems entirely arbitrary. As I mentioned earlier, Zero Gunner has you globetrotting around the world, liberating major cities in specific parts of the world from terrorists, aliens, or attention-seeking Instagram e-celebs, I don't know. But the reason for you being where you are doesn't really matter. All that really matters is blowing everything up and feeling like a total badass while doing it. The graphics in Zero Zero Gunner are excellent, with each city you visit being unique and well detailed for the time this game came out. There are recognizable landmarks in some of the cities, and even the architecture resembles what you might see if you were visiting one of them. Although, I don't remember the massive city-sized tank battle stations in pictures I've seen of London or Tokyo, but whatever. Other than the stage graphics, the enemy graphics are also pretty good, with there being a decent variety of ships for you to blast through. However, the real standouts in Zero Gunner are the game's many bosses that you'll encounter at the end of each of the game's stages, equaling 15 bosses in total. Several of these bosses are recycled across stages, so there is slightly less than 15 of them, but they are still very cool and memorable regardless. Some of my favorites were taking out the giant stealth bomber attacking you while it's taking off from the runway, and also the truck full of mechs that attacks you after their transport crashes. It's details like this that make me wish this game had been at one of the many arcades I went to growing up, because as impressive as this game is now, this game would have blown my 10-year-old mind back then. The visuals are definitely the game's greatest asset, and I'd even go as far as to say it's one of the best looking Model 2 games released, which is made even more impressive by the fact that Sega didn't develop or publish this game. That's like someone creating a sport and writing all the rules and you literally beating them at their own game. Props, Psycho. Mad props. Unfortunately, the audio in Zero Gunner is less impressive. While there isn't anything downright bad or offensive about the audio in this game, it's just sort of there with really nothing else to say about it. The soundtrack isn't particularly memorable and uses some generic action movie soundtrack to play behind the noises of projectiles being fired and ships exploding. It was pretty obvious that the sounds coming from Zero Gunner weren't a priority when creating this game. But then again, not every game can be Battle Garega or Dodonpachi, where you literally play the game just to listen to the OST. All things considered, Zero Gunner is definitely a respectable, mostly well-made shmup from the 1990s. However, it fails to be remarkable in any real way, which is probably why it faded into obscurity. That's a shame, as while it's not a masterpiece like Dodonpachi, it's certainly a game that deserved more love back in the day, as well as today. Psycho should have really made an effort to port this game to one of those recently released Psycho Shooting Collection compilations, which I imagine they probably didn't given the difficulty in porting an old arcade game like this to modern consoles when no previous port was ever created for it. But personally, I would have much rather had this game included on one of the Psycho compilations over a game like Sengoku Cannon or Soul Divide. But I suppose if you really want to play this game, you can always drop a ton of money on an arcade board or cabinet, or research the various ways of playing this game on a PC if you're not scared of the emulation boogeyman. Whatever you do though, give this game a try and enjoy a forgotten yet great arcade shooter from the glory days of 1990s arcades.